Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by my friend Jeff Bell. Jeff, I think it's your second. I was trying to think just before the show, second time on the show, third time on the show. You're definitely a repeat guest, and we always enjoy talking to you. You can follow him on Twitter at for whom J Bell Tolls. Great Twitter name. Jeff, tell everybody what you've been working on and where they can find your work.
Yeah, so everything's going to be with football guys, and you nailed the Twitter there. So that's the social media that I kind of defer to. And then, so Mondays I've got an article coming out called the Monday Roundup, and I really just kind of run through that week's action. That ends up being around 7,000 words, so that's a pretty meaty read on that one. We do the Dynasty Show with Jagger May. We have 3 episodes dropping weekly. We do the DFS show. Get the opportunity to host that for football guys. That usually comes out on Fridays, and then we have the Audible Live with Matt Waldman on Thursday nights. We have the Dave Kluge and I do a show in injury report, just run down through the entire week's action going into Friday. Sunday morning, I do a start sit show with Joey Wright and Jagger May. And then also do some Dynasty Roundtables, Dynasty Movement type work, and Dynasty Waiver work.
He does all of the shows. That is fantastic, Jeff. Thank you for that. We were talking about this time of year and how it's interesting from the perspective of doing your job, but it's also interesting from the perspective of being a dynasty manager, because I do think, like I always talk about, I don't really want to trade my first round pick in the offseason if I'm a contender. I'd like to wait until November. And it's almost November. In fact, it will be November by next week's show. So we are going to talk about some potential buys for contenders. I've got 10 for you. Jeff can tell me if I'm crazy on some of these guys. We're also going to talk about some guys that I kind of think look like short-term contributors or have been short-term contributors and what their future may be. Guys like Bo Nix, Jameis Winston after yesterday, TJ Hawkinson's back. So it kind of just are these guys just for the near term, or can we look at them long term as well? But as always, we start with 3 questions for our guest. Now, Jeff, it's been a fantastic year for running backs, one of the best that I can remember. And all of the wide receivers at the top of the draft have been hurt. Almost. Like it seems like 90% of the first 3 rounds of redraft wide receivers have suffered some sort of injury. It's definitely going to alter like the data when you're talking about missed games for running backs and wide receivers. But from a dynasty perspective, has it changed your opinion at all on how we view these 2 positions?
From a dynasty perspective, no, I still think the value lies in building rosters around young receivers with upside. And I still think you absolutely have running backs that step into opportunity that create value on that. So from dynasty, I still tend to lean toward a 0 RB type approach, or at least I like to have a hero running back usually on my dynasty rosters. I like to nail my wide receivers, especially deeper leagues. I like to have a deep bench of wide receivers that I'm able to fill out my lineup with, and then really fill out the rest of the bench with those backup running back situations that can step into value. And we see obviously Jordan Mason this year is the type of player that's gotten a lot of value. Tyrone Tracy last night went off. That was another situation. And you still continue to see that with the running backs. And I think that's still going to be there. I think that the biggest shift in terms of these positions and the way that at least viewing it right now is it seems the era of the committee, it seems to be a little bit dead right now. And I think a lot of that comes into teams not wanting to tip their hand based upon what running back is going into the game, teams kind of looking at different ways that they're able to maybe lighten a workload for a running back, kind of a lot of these pop passes or screen passes, those quarterback run type situations. I think teams have kind of realized that they're able to keep the same running back on the field while keeping them a little bit fresher from when you think back 15 years ago, the way a running back was used. And so right. I think a lot of those factors have contributed to valuing maybe higher end running backs a little bit more. And not only that, more of these solid running backs. And I would place a little bit more value on locked in running backs. But again, I think that still overall, in terms of building a roster, there's still a lot of value with building wide receiver and then kind of being able to replace running back production.
So I'm going to give my favorite buys for contenders a little bit later in the show, but I wanted to give you a chance here at the top to get one of your guys out there on your contending dynasty teams. Who is the guy you want to go buy this week?
I want to go by Zay Flowers. And if you would have asked me this question last week, I would have said Josh Jacobs, but I kind of saw the Jacksonville matchup on the schedule and thought Jacobs is getting the volume and this is going to be a great opportunity for him. He was really just lacking the touchdowns. Zay Flowers is another guy that he's getting a ton of volume, especially when you look over the last month, the last 4 games. He had that injury against the Buccaneers that kind of just eliminated that. But you remove that, he's pacing toward a 2,000-yard season over the last 3 games. They're using him very, very heavily. And I think the perception still sits with him. He's a little bit boom bust and kind of a young receiver. Baltimore still kind of a run-heavy team. It's really just the touchdowns that are lacking, that are holding him back from being an elite fantasy scorer once you look at the overall volume. And I think that Baltimore is going to continue to score a lot of touchdowns. So I do think the touchdowns are going to come and he's going to really ascend a tier. And so that's what I want to buy if I'm going to be a contender, is a player like that I can not only help me win a championship this year, but be a building stone moving forward for my roster.
So I think that's a really interesting name, because I think you'll have a hard time, especially if you're a top contender, getting somebody to accept just a late first for Zay Flowers. So what are you willing to give into an addition? Are you talking about like a bench piece and a late first? You think a first and second might get it done? What's a good thing to offer for Zay Flowers?
I think a first, maybe some of these young players that has some excitement that haven't quite popped yet, guys like a Kimani Vidal or like something like that, and maybe building offers around a first as like a centerpiece, and then a couple of those different pieces to basically say, if you're not winning right now, and we're going to try to build you for the future here. You're getting at first, you're getting a couple of these younger players that maybe you're not willing to stomach the risk on working out anymore, and kind of maybe some of those options to be the centerpiece to build a trade around.
So let's flip that question on its head now. Who are you trying to sell in Dynasty this week?
Who am I trying to sell in Dynasty? Jaylen Warren, I think, is somebody that I'm trying to sell. J.K. Dobbins is somebody that I'm trying to sell. Okay. I think Dobbins, I'm surprised by where I see consensus ranks on Dobbins. I don't know if the value in leagues matches where I see him ranked in some consensus areas. In terms of Dynasty, I see him running back 22 on Keep Trade Cut. That surprises me if he would actually be treated like that. But that's a situation that we saw the great debut those first 2 weeks and the explosion when he came out, but then the efficiency's fallen off, the big plays have fallen off, and you're just he's been running back 28 since week 3, so you're just kind of looking at a middling. Do I want to start him? Do I not want to start him? Well, I feel like I have to start him because it's going to be there. And then Warren is a player, he's going to be a free agent at the end of this year, and we've seen Najee Harris look much better over the past month plus, and then that offense looks a lot better with Russell Wilson. There was a lot of excitement around Warren, especially coming into the year, a lot of the efficiency-based metrics, those types of things. And the injury's been an issue, but that's a situation where I'd probably would just be looking to recoup some value and not really worry about it too much, because I do think Najee Harris is the lion's share of the leader in that backfield.
So I traded for Dobbins after his injury last year. Somebody said first person to send me a fourth for J.K. Dobbins gets him, and I immediately jumped on that. I've got him on a team that's probably not a contender. Looks like not quite bad enough to have a top pick, one of the dreaded middle teams, but I'm moving the right direction at least. Are you accepting in that type of situation? Are you accepting a round 2 pick for J.K. Dobbins?
I would probably want a round 2 pick, and then maybe a kind of a buried running back that has the potential, like an Audric Estime or something like that. If you were able to get like maybe a round 2 pick, or I'll give you J.K. Dobbins and a 4, and you give me a second and Estime or something like that. That's kind of off the radar a little bit is what I like to slide those running backs that can step into potential value in the future, just like you did with Dobbins last year.
Right. I like that idea of getting the pick and then just getting kind of a lottery ticket as well. So that's very good. Aaron Johnson. Aaron, thank you very much. Just happy to catch the show live again this week. Best Dynasty show in the game. If you agree with Aaron, please smash the like button. Please subscribe. If you're listening on the podcast, you can really help us out by giving us a review and a 5-star rating. I appreciate everybody's feedback last week on the one-man mailbag and potential guests. I will be inviting some of those people. But again, any way you can help show your love for us like Aaron did helps us to maybe get to 2 episodes all year next year. We will definitely do that in the off season. Let's take our first break, and then we'll get to some guys that I've got some questions for Jeff. Is how long are these guys going to stick? Okay, Jeff. So look, we play the long game here in Dynasty, but a lot of times it's hard to separate what's happened the last couple of weeks from what we think happens in the next few years. I think a great guy is an example of that. You mentioned him already, Tyrone Tracy, and what he did last night. Now, he's in the concussion protocol. You're probably not going to be able to start him in week 9, but that's okay because what we saw is he grabbed he's clearly the lead back for the Giants, and he was awesome in that game against Pittsburgh. He's also a 5th round running back. And a lot of times these low draft capital rookie running backs that pop like this, especially on bad teams, especially on teams that have coaching changes. I'm not saying the Giants are, but there's at least a possibility. Those guys just disappear. I'm talking about like a James Robinson. And it's happened over and over and over again. Do you think Tyrone Tracy is someone who's going to be an RB, a must-start running back in fantasy in next year, the year beyond, or is this a guy that you should be looking to make a quick profit on?
As long as the Giants don't move on from Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, I still believe that Tyrone Tracy has a great opportunity, that they really love Devin Singletary. And we saw on Hard Knocks, the Giants talking about there, they really, Dable kind of jumped up when the opportunity, Devin Singletary's name was mentioned to replace Saquon Barkley. I think from what we've seen, they're willing to allow Tracy to run with that job and kind of have Singletary as kind of a complementary piece there. If they were to move on from Singletary or a new coach, a new regime, that's where I would get nervous and think about that 5th round kind of value on him. So I think from what we're seeing, the reveal that we're seeing, especially what we saw last night, I would have to believe this coaching staff and this organization would go with him moving forward. But like I said, if they decide to maybe chop that contract off Singletary, that would be an indicator that they're looking at something else, or if a new decision maker comes in.
You mentioned J.K. Dobbins as a sell earlier. Would you rather have Tyrone Tracy in a dynasty league than Dobbins?
Oh, easily. I would definitely rather have Tracy than Dobbins.
And I think that's an area where consensus probably hasn't caught up to that yet, unless it just changed last night. Because Dobbins was definitely viewed higher before that. Let's talk about another rookie, Bo Nix. Wow, did he take Carolina to the woodshed? 34, 35 fantasy points. And actually has been much better than expected so far this year. Has the lowest sack rate amongst rookie quarterbacks, is 3rd amongst all quarterbacks in red zone rush attempts. And he's right up there in terms of passing touchdowns with the rookies. I think we said this back in March, that he seems like the perfect fit for a Sean Payton offense. And that marriage is working pretty well, pretty early on. But we've also seen a lot of young quarterbacks that we feel like are better for fantasy than they are for real life, that end up losing their job in a year or two. How confident do you feel that Bo Nix is a starting quarterback for the next 3 or 4 years, maybe even is getting to a second contract?
Right now I feel very confident based upon what we've seen, especially the last couple of weeks. That Thursday night performance against the Saints, he didn't have a high volume of yards, and they just won that game, but he looked very in control in that. And in the post game, Sean Payton and Bo Nix were on the set for Amazon, and that was really interesting just to see the chemistry between the two of them. You can clearly see that Sean Payton believes in Bo Nix. And obviously this past week against Carolina, he did exactly what we would hope he would do against Carolina. I think that marriage is right now is set in stone. From what we've seen from Bo Nix, he's the type of player that it's, maybe like Brock Purdy-esque, where he's played a lot of college football. He's a little bit more athletic than Purdy, but kind of that seems to work pretty well. He's played a lot of college football, has a quick processor, has seen a lot of different looks, and that usually tends to be the young players that stick and work out in the league. And it kind of the ones that kind of flame out seem to be a little bit more of the boom bust type prospect or betting on the potential. So that's where I think Nix fits that profile. The coaching staff loves him. We're seeing him do this without really high end players around him. So you go out and maybe they draft a receiver or do something in free agency and you really start to put some pieces around him, you'd have to believe that it would just continue to get better.
Yeah, I think it might be even a similar answer to what you gave on Tracy. Is Sean Payton going to be in Denver for the next 5 years? And I guess Bo Nix is probably going to be his starting quarterback. So I do think that's a good marriage. I would be very concerned if there was a regime change in Denver, that the new coaching staff just wasn't quite as enamored with Bo Nix. Let's talk about the guy that Sean Payton ran out of town so that he could go get Bo Nix. We got Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. two quarterbacks who pretty much left for dead by their former teams. Winston looked fantastic in his first start. Wilson, and I was optimistic about him, I'll admit it. But I've been really happy with the way Wilson has looked, throwing the deep ball, looks like his old self. Maybe not his all the way MVP old self, but you know what I mean. Do you think Jameis Winston or Russell Wilson are starting in the NFL next year?
Right now, I would say I think Russell Wilson is, because from what we've seen off 2 games, and it really seems like Mike Tomlin likes Russell Wilson quite a bit, and Russell Wilson has taken to that Steelers organization. So that would be my expectation. We can't imagine the Steelers being in any sort of position to add a young quarterback outside of maybe Justin Fields being there. And is Justin Fields going to resign, or is Justin Fields going to look for a potential different opportunity if Russell Wilson continues what's happening here and leads the Steelers into the playoffs or a playoff run? In terms of Winston, I think if Winston were 10% less like Jameis Winston, or like that person, I feel like NFL coaches and front office has a tough time buying into that personality as their starting quarterback or the face of their franchise. And I feel like if Winston had scaled it back just a little bit, he probably would have been a franchise quarterback somewhere else over the last handful of years, despite the turnovers. It just, that potential is so much, and being a first round pick and showing versus what you're seeing some desperation signs in some other places. I think he would have had a better gig basically than I just think that Jameis Winston is so Jameis Winston, and we love it as football fans, and it's a lot of fun. But I think that when you look at what an organization wants their franchise quarterback to be, they want that boardroom type personality, or they're a little bit concerned probably what's the next thing that Jameis is going to say.
So I think a lot of times when you in a super flex dynasty league, my general rule of thumb is any starting quarterback is worth a late first.
Yeah.
Or would you say that, if I'm a contender, I'm probably okay giving up that late first for Russ, but I wouldn't give more than a second for Jameis?
I would not give up a first for either of these guys.
Okay.
Where it stands right now, even feeling good about what we've seen at that age, I still wouldn't give up a first. Probably it would probably be a second or some sort of package like that.
I think for me, it really comes down to, and it's one of the reasons that I don't like to trade the first in the summer or early in the season. It's like, how certain am I that first is? And by this point in the year, you should be a little more certain. Like if I've got an 8-0 team or a 7-0 team or 7-1 or even 6-2 probably, then I'm more likely to do it. If I'm sitting there at 5-3, then no chance, because that could go wrong in a hurry. Someone made a comment in the chat about Jordan Mason. They're not feeling very good about it. We did put him in the thumbnail because I do think it's a question we need to ask. Like, this guy was leading the NFL in rushing not too long ago. Looked very good in what you might call his audition, but now he's hurt again. Christian McCaffrey's coming back. The team's on bye. Is there any dynasty value for Jordan Mason? Does he have any value in future years? Is it just like the J.K. Dobbins deal I made last year, the first person to send me a fourth gets Jordan Mason, or do you have some hope that he actually gets opportunity?
I think he's got a chance. He's going to be a free agent, and I think that's worth considering. And so if you're going to be a free agent, we've seen anything can happen in free agency, and players can land in different situations. And the draft pick of Isaac Grundo, to me, feels like a clear sign that the 49ers are setting up for their future, and that future probably doesn't include Jordan Mason unless Christian McCaffrey really struggles to come back. If Christian McCaffrey comes back as Christian McCaffrey, I think you're going to see Jordan Mason really diminished if he is involved at all, because that's another offense, like we talked about it at the very top, that it seems Kyle Shanahan wants that one guy in there and doesn't want to tip his hand, and especially Christian McCaffrey being that one guy. So I think that the opportunity to sell Jordan Mason, you miss that window probably, and especially with the talk about Christian McCaffrey coming back in week 10 after the bye, and especially given the injury to Jordan Mason. But I think it's worth holding Mason in terms of anything can happen in free agency. And I think he's shown enough that another team would be willing to go out there and do that. Like, what if he goes to, Jaylen Warren's in Miami, so we like that. We want that to happen. But like Jordan Mason kind of as a compliment to Devin Achane and serving in the Rasheem Mostert role or like something like that. I mean, that's certainly on the table for Mason.
I do think at this point holding is probably the right answer. Matt says I'm 3-5 in a league where I already pushed all in, and that's the risk of pushing all in the summer. I think he kind of breaks it down here for us. I'm gonna read the other comments. He says I sent my second and got Jordan Mason. That worked out fantastic. Like the second, I think for a half a season of Jordan Mason as an RB1 is worth it. And my first in the offseason for Derrick Henry against Heath's advice, I was flat out wrong about Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
But this still shows the risk. You can be right about the trade. You can get the great player, and the rest of your team doesn't perform, and you don't have your first round pick, and you're 3-5. So there is a lot of risk there, even if you happen to be right about the players that you're trading for. Got a couple of wide receivers here, probably moving in different directions in the rankings, but Wan'Dale Robinson has been very good option in PPR this year. Before last night, had a 27% target share on the year. And Cedric Tillman, who has just gone bananas since Amari Cooper got dealt away. I think Robinson's value probably falling a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Tillman's exploding. Do you think these guys are more than just, like in Robinson's case, a PPR number 3 for the rest of the year, and in Tillman's case, maybe a number 3 as well? Or do you think that they have some ability to grow into something more in the future still?
No, I mean, Cedric Tillman, I won't rule it out that he could have the potential to grow into more, because if you go back, he was supposed to be basically the Jalen Hyatt breakout at Tennessee when Hyatt won the Blakenikoff. That was supposed to be Cedric Tillman. He just was injured that year and wasn't able to be in that position. So if Tillman was not hurt that year, there's a very potential different path for Tillman's entire career, where maybe he would have been that guy that would have taken off with Hendon Hooker and won the Biletnikoff, and maybe would be a fringe first round pick instead of having that injury plagued years last year at Tennessee. So that potential is there. And like Nico Collins is a name that kind of comes to my mind with Cedric Tillman, where that I think there was the path where Tillman could have been on that trajectory. And now we're seeing obviously great rapport between him and Jameis Winston, but you're seeing big playmaker down the field, able to win vertically. And I think that given the cover 2, that's a lot of what teams are looking for, is that big receiver that can win downfield or break into the middle of the safeties and break tackles downfield, those types of things to create those big plays. And Tillman, I think, fits that bill. Robinson, I'm skeptical, hesitant on. I just don't know that I see Robinson as the long-term number 2 next to Malik Neighbors. I don't know that that's really, I think Robinson is a fine complementary receiver that can work in a rotation, kind of as your slot or whatever it might be. But I think when you're looking at team building, I want to shoot a little bit higher, probably, if I'm the Giants and building a team, and especially if I'm resetting and looking at the future. I want Neighbors, maybe if it's possible, to have a true number 2 complement outside that can allow Neighbors to maybe kind of move around formation. That's where I'm skeptical on Robinson being that long term.
And then we've got one tight end, another young guy, Tucker Kraft, just 24 years old, second amongst tight ends with 5 receiving touchdowns this year. And listen, there's been some talk about Tucker Kraft, but we don't talk about him as a potentially like number 1 tight end in Dynasty. But should we be?
Yeah, I absolutely think we should. And what we saw early in the year, we saw him really the number 1 tight end in Green Bay, almost on the field every single snap. And we saw Luke Musgrave kind of in a situational role. And I think that that's opposite from where many of us had played it. You saw Kraft and Musgrave drafted in the same class. And all the talk around Green Bay was, there was a lot of excitement about Kraft because he's just a big size speed blend, a rare type of player at tight end that can be that every down player. Whereas Musgrave took off earlier last year because he grasped the offense a little bit quicker. And that was I saw the Packers say that this offseason was basically Kraft was the guy that we were hoping would take off. He just was a little bit slow out of the gate. Musgrave wasn't. So Musgrave was the main guy to begin with. Then when we saw Musgrave injury out for the second portion of last year, missing time the second portion of last year, we really saw Kraft come in. And yeah, I think Kraft is their tight end of the future, tight end of the present. And then I think Musgrave exactly what we saw earlier this year when they want to play 2 tight end sets. Musgrave will work in there, but I think they want to cycle through and rotate the different options.
So coming into this week, I always do my actual Dynasty rankings updates on Wednesdays. Coming into this week, I did have Kraft at tight end 10. So I want to give you some names, and we're going to go rapid fire on a few of these questions here. but Pat Freiermuth or Tucker Kraft in Dynasty?
Kraft for me.
Kraft or Jake Ferguson?
I would say Kraft over Ferguson.
Kraft or Mark Andrews, who's 5 years older?
Mark Andrews still probably.
Okay. And then we're all going to take TJ Hawkinson, I think, over Tucker Kraft, but I do like, this is a different segment. What do you expect from TJ Hawkinson the rest of this year? Is he someone that, if you are a contender, is someone you think can help you make the push down the stretch, or is he more of a better roster for a team that's playing for 2025?
I think it's a better 2025 play, to be honest. And I think that Sam Darnold has been fine. I don't know that Sam Darnold's been quite as good as maybe we think Sam Darnold has been. And especially early in the season, we were seeing that fantasy production and that win streak kind of added a lot together. But I think that really he's just zeroing in on Justin Jefferson, which, I mean, I can't blame him. That's the way that I would have it be as well. And hyper targeting Jefferson as that number one option, really probably arguably in the league, and getting the ball to him. And then every other piece is a little bit secondary. And I think that early in the season, we had a little bit of a false flag on Jalen Naylor because he did have those, I think it was 3 games in a row that he caught a touchdown that kind of boosted his point total. Now you're seeing Jordan Addison. There was some social media stuff that Jordan Addison might be a little bit frustrated with his lack of a role in Minnesota. And I think Hawkinson's going to step into maybe a similar situation off the recovery, where there's just not going to be a lot of volume relative to they're running the offense through Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson.
Excellent stuff. We had a couple of questions in the chat about the guys we've been talking about. I think this won't be easy for you based on the wall behind you, but Tillman or Shakir?
It's Shakir for me. Yeah, you're right.
Is that not even close, right?
No, not even close. I think that Shakir, he got hurt against the Ravens, and kind of there was a little bit of a downtick in the injury, but now we saw last week back 100 yards, I think 9 catches last week. He's just been a consistent playmaker. He's got Josh Allen's trust. You're playing with higher upside there with Allen as the quarterback. So yeah, I'm definitely taking Shakir.
Bo Nix or Trevor Lawrence?
I still go Lawrence.
Can you believe that you hesitated though?
Close. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. And, part of that's in the back of my mind. You see Christian Kirk is out for the year. Obviously, it sounds like Brian Thomas Jr. is going to miss a little bit of time. So what's Lawrence going to be dealing with? And we're seeing Bo Nix putting up what he's putting up without even what Trevor Lawrence has. So that's a consideration. But I think Lawrence, especially in fantasy, has been maybe better than people realize.
But this year, yeah, it's the way that things go, though. Like the pendulum swings. We had 3 years basically of the community making excuses for him and saying he was better than his production. And now he's producing a little bit better than what the perception of him is. He's the definition, I think, of a high-end QB2. And Bo Nix is probably still a mid QB2. But the gap has definitely shrunk. One more, and I think I know probably where you're going, but Tyjae Spears or Tyrone Tracy?
Definitely Tracy on this one. Spears, I think Spears is maybe one of the biggest disappointments from this season. I think we thought that there would be a split role in Tennessee there, and it's all Tony Pollard.
Well, I said the last one, but I do want to kind of address this. I thought Brian Thomas Jr. was just day-to-day. We got multiple reports yesterday. We heard 2 to 4 weeks, and we heard Doug Peterson say day-to-day. Doug Peterson does not have the most reliable track record when it comes to talking about his own players' injuries. So I think, well, the way I'm handling it, if I have Brian Thomas Jr., I'm making plans to start someone else this week and hoping that he's back. I'm not really letting the injury affect what I would view as his dynasty value, which is a borderline top 12 guy at this point, or his redraft value, which is an easy wide receiver 2 for the rest of the season. Let's take our second break, and then we're going to get into some buys for contenders.
CBS Sports HQ, giving you college football coverage unlike anyone else.
We're talking Big Ten.
Pre- and post-game coverage.
Are you encouraged with the way that this team responded?
Along with breaking news.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
Highlights and expert analysis.
That streak could be in jeopardy here.
Sure. What was your main takeaway from this game? How impressive was his domination?
That really changed the football game.
Let's go ahead and have some more fun.
Another wild ending.
The chaos continues.
Turn to CBS Sports HQ.
We are back. We've got some dynasty buys. We had somebody in the chat ask us, can I get anything for Stephon Diggs now if he's out for the year? I'll tell you what, I think it's probably going to be easier to just go trade for somebody to replace Stephon Diggs. This is the risk with players at his stage of his career, is a major injury that could impact 2025 as well, can just completely sink his value. I'm not sure you could get a second round pick for Stephon Diggs right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, the way he ended last year and the questions about even the summer, like,
Right.
it was like, I've heard people say they weren't able to get a second or could only get a second for Stephon Diggs this summer. So the idea you're going to get much more than that now, it does not seem realistic.
I've got a terrible story to tell you because people like to hear about my misery. I have my most confusing team, Dynasty team. And I shared this team at the beginning of the year, asked what I should do, and half of Twitter told me to go for it, and half of Twitter told me to sell. But it's a team with James Conner and Aaron Jones and Cooper Kupp and Travis Kelce. And my quarterbacks coming into the year were Drake May and Gardner Minshew and Justin Fields. Well, obviously Fields got benched for Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
And after Wilson's first start, I went and traded a second and a third for Russell Wilson. It's a super flex league. And this week, Gardner Minshew outscored Russell Wilson by 4 fantasy points. Wilson's last fumble cost me a win. And I'm now 4-4. But make me feel better. He's my first guy. I've got these contender buys broken into 2 groups. We've got 5 cheap buys. We've got 5 more expensive buys. I know those labels are extremely creative. And Russell Wilson is the cheap quarterback that I'm targeting because, like I said, it's really hard to get a starting quarterback for less than a first-round pick in a super flex league. I just traded a second and a third for him. Are you okay doing that if you're a contender?
Yeah, if I'm a contender, and I think those picks are going to be late, part of me thinks that if you're filling in the quarterback 2 spot with Russell Wilson, are you really a contender? But that's kind of, I do wonder that a little bit. But at the same time, no, I think that the biggest thing with him of what we've seen is it really seems like Arthur Smith understands the type of player Russell Wilson is, and they're building around a physical run game and attacking vertically downfield as opposed to, Sean Payton trying to turn him into Drew Brees and getting mad when he wasn't able to turn a 35-year-old Russell Wilson into Drew Brees. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway. And Russ looks good. He was scrambling like you would expect him to scramble and hitting downfield plays. And the Steelers have the options downfield there.
I've got 1 cheap running back, and he should be, I want to be clear, he should be really cheap. But Alexander Mattison is absolutely dominating running back touches for the Raiders. I think it's 17 touches in 4 straight games. They've really, over the last month or so, and especially since Jacoby Myers came back this week, consolidated this offense to where the running back touches go to Madison, the wide receiver targets now go to Jacoby Myers, and then a fourth of the touches go to Brock Bowers. And I love it. It's a bad offense, but if it's that concentrated, they can be good. I think Alexander Madison's probably an RB2, maybe a low-end RB2 for the rest of the season, coming off of an absolutely awful game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Everybody knows he's a rental. You might be able to acquire him for a 3rd-round pick. And at the worst case scenario, I think you can plug him in as a flex. What do you think about Madison?
I absolutely agree with you. I think that that's a great call out. And I think it's the perfect time to buy him because, like you said, playing against the Chiefs, I mean, we should have expected that. Everybody struggles against the Chiefs. They're the best in the league against running backs in fantasy. So there was no surprise there. It's really, you talk about the way they've consolidated their offense. They're really kind of using Brock Bowers as the receiving back in a lot of plays and kind of using Brock Bowers as the complementary back to Alexander Mattison. And Alexander Mattison, you're exactly right, has taken over the lion's share of that work. It's really what people were hoping Zamir White would be on that team. And so you are seeing with Madison. And I think that there's enough ill feelings with Madison, given the way the Vikings played out last year, that anybody that's got him is probably thrilled to get anything for him. And so that's where, if you've got maybe some of these guys like a Roman Wilson or something like that, that you're kind of ready to move off of, you're not just haven't seen it this rookie year and you're ready to move off and looking for where you can get production. That is probably what I would like try to move for Madison.
We've got 2 wide receivers on the list. We just talked about Jacoby Myers. I think he's a low-end wide receiver 2, most likely. I believe he now has something like 36 targets, 34 targets over his last 4 games. Expect somewhere between 10 and 15 PPR points per game. And again, another guy who should be really cheap because I don't have much hope that Jacoby Myers matters in fantasy next year. He's just probably the Raiders' #1 wide receiver for the second half. And then DeAndre Hopkins, first game in Kansas City, did almost nothing. I think ran about the same number of snaps as Amari Cooper in his first game in Buffalo. They just didn't look to get him the ball. But the couple of times they did, I thought it looked like DeAndre Hopkins. And he still has the hands. And teams are still going to be holes in that type of coverage they play. He's going to be able to exploit. And so I really am pretty optimistic about what DeAndre Hopkins could be late in the season. Another guy who I think should be super cheap.
Yeah, I love that call out of Hopkins. I mean, obviously you're a Chiefs fan, so you know how that offense works. But when I saw that move, my expectation was that I thought he was going to be a Justin Watson upgrade and kind of like more on the outside and contested ball situations. And part of me was like, I don't know that that's a big role in many NFL offenses right now. But then you hear that he's going to be really kind of moved inside and treated like Rashee Rice. I love that because, I think he's smart. He's going to be able to find holes in coverage, and Mahomes is going to be able to find him there. And he's a mismatch nightmare because you're going to put a little nickel back on him, or you're going to put a hybrid safety linebacker that we're seeing be a lot of the nickel back situations now. And that's going to be trouble for those guys to cover DeAndre Hopkins. So I like that call out quite a bit. I'm more optimistic that Jacoby Myers is still a productive fantasy player next year. I think that he's pacing right towards like 100 catches and 1,000-yard season right now, and he's kind of right on that. That feels like the most Jacoby Myers line possible, but that's where he's sitting right now. And I think that you're going to see him. It seems to be, I don't know if concern about just the offense in general, or just we've never seen him have high end upside, whatever it might be. But he's one of these guys, like Darnell Mooney, I feel like is another one where they're going to end up being wide receiver 36. And when you're playing in these deep dynasty leagues where you're starting 10 to 11 guys, they can be difference makers in the depth of your lineup.
So we did have a question from Aaron. Does Juju's return temper your Hopkins optimism? I could be wrong about this. I don't have any inside information, but my expectation is that if Hopkins can stay healthy, Juju's probably not going to matter much. I'm not dropping Juju, but I do think, and you read the quotes too, Jeff. It sounds like they plan on playing Hopkins in that shorter area role. And I'm also not sure that Juju can play football for more than a couple weeks without getting hurt. Unfortunately, I loved him the first couple of years there in Pittsburgh. He's just not been able to do it. I think not much to say about Cade Otton. Expect a 20% target share maybe until Mike Evans gets back. Just a clear top even 5 tight end. What's that?
I think even after, I think you can expect that even after. When you look at the other options there, I think Evans would shoehorn back into being the clear wide receiver 1, but obviously there's trust between Otton and Baker Mayfield. And Otton, I mean, he was a very highly thought of prospect for most of his college career and just kind of was under the radar a little bit in the draft. We seen him. They brought in a lot of tight ends there to see who would emerge, and it was definitely Otton. He's going to be on the field every single play, and he's really kind of, I think, can take over the Chris Godwin role that we're hoping that one of these other wide receivers takes over.
And then we got 5 more expensive buys. We'll move through these just maybe a little bit quicker, but Geno Smith, I know if you've been rostering Geno Smith, you've probably heard this, because we've been making excuses for him for half of a season now. But I really think this is the week when it breaks loose. I think Geno Smith's still getting all the opportunities, still leads the NFL in passing yards. Eventually the touchdowns are going to come. And that might be a really good time if the guy who's been rostering Geno is getting frustrated by hearing every week us talk about how well Geno's playing and him not producing fantasy points. I'd like to go buy Geno. Joe Mixon might be the number 1 running back in fantasy rest of season. I think he's averaging 25 fantasy points per game in the games he doesn't leave early. Mike Evans, we talked about this on the main FFT. When you look at that schedule after their bye, I don't know if a wide receiver could have a better schedule. And he's going to be behind pace. You mentioned that 1,000-yard season for Jacoby Myers. Mike Evans has got to get it. It's a big deal to him, and they've shown that late in the season at times. So I like his chances of making a big run. And then both the 49ers, Debo and George Kittle. Let's go through each of these, Jeff, and you just kind of tell me, you've got a true contender. What Superflex League will say, what are you willing to give? And if you disagree on buying one of them, make sure you say that too. But Geno Smith, what's he worth for your contender?
I'm skeptical on Geno. I think what we see is what we're going to get. And so I don't know that I would give a first, to be honest, for Geno Smith. It would probably be like a second built around package.
Okay. Joe Mixon.
Man, Heath, I really struggle to give up a first for anybody over like 24 years old.
I know.
It's I agree completely that Mixon can be the running back one over the rest of the season. And if I feel really, really good, I might be willing to do that first and think about maybe a young under the radar piece I can include to get like back with Mixon. But I believe in him, and I do believe that that running back one overall is in the range.
Mike Evans, even older.
And yeah, that's where I love the call out and I love the potential for the production, but I don't know that his value is a first in my mind either.
Would you give 2 seconds? Like a 25 and 26 second?
Yeah, seconds, especially in contending seconds. That's my wheelhouse, and especially this time of year. That's where I want to deal those seconds for veterans that can augment a roster. I'm very not willing to give up first round picks.
So Chris Godwin is 3 years younger than Evans and had been better before he got hurt. It's not an ACL. I don't think we expect it's going to be a long-term rehab. If you had Chris Godwin on a contender, would you deal him for Mike Evans?
Yeah, I think I would do that if it was a true contender and I was really pushing in to try to win right now. I would do that. Godwin, potential free agent after this year, and that might sound like a silly question, but from a dynasty perspective, like in a vacuum, forgetting that contender thing, you'd rather have Chris Godwin on a roster than Mike Evans, right? In a vacuum has higher dynasty value, but that might be a deal where you can trade it. And I think if you're not a contender, those are the types of deals you should be trying to make, like try to profit on these little dips in value that aren't going to impact you. And then I kind of view both Debo and Kittle as potential league winners without Ayuk the rest of the way. Do you have one that you would prefer to buy? Kittle right now over the last month, Kittle has basically he's pacing towards the best tight end fantasy season ever over the last 4 weeks. And we saw 128 yards on Sunday Night Football, 125, whatever it ended up being on Sunday Night Football. We see that from Kittle. I mean, the upside is there that Kittle, especially in that tight end position, can really be a big boom to your lineup.
Jeff, I always enjoy talking to you. I wanted to give you one more chance. Just tell everybody where they can find your stuff, where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on social media at For Whom J Bell Tolls on X or Twitter, whatever you prefer. And then you can find me with Football Guys. I've got articles that are coming up multiple times throughout the week. And then I'm on shows that hit the YouTube channels and the podcast channels for, I hit every avenue possible for Football Guys there. So it's a good chance if you're consuming Football Guys content, you'll probably bump into me.
Thank you as always, Jeff. Thanks to Nada. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat and everybody listening on the podcast. We will talk to you next Tuesday.